a commercial endeavor to explore and exploit the far north's mineral riches. A fleet of 15 ships bearing food, tools, prefabricated houses, and more than 400 men to toil around the clock during the short Arctic summer. On the eve of the 21st century, such an undertaking would not seem unusual, but it happened more than 400 years ago. Their leader, a valiant English sea captain, made 3 far-reaching voyages, but before they ended, his exploits had faded into history. I'm John Rhys-Davies. Join me as we search for a forgotten explorer, next on Archaeology. To those who knew him, he was a man of vision. His name was Martin Frobisher. His dream, to find the elusive Northwest Passage. 4 centuries ago, this valiant sea captain became the first Englishman to set foot in the New World. What followed is a tale fraught with greed and intrigue, misfortune and folly. There, on the threshold of the Americas, a chance discovery turned his conquest into disaster. It is ironic, isn't it, that though Martin Frobisher's name is rarely mentioned in American textbooks, he and his men live on in the oral history of Native Americans. For centuries, the Inuit people of the Arctic have passed down tales of this intrepid Englishman, and the half-dozen of his crew left behind to perish on the ice. Now, archaeologists search the barren wastes of Frobisher Bay for clues to the English explorer whose journeys changed the course of British imperialism and, in time, the face of the world. Above the Arctic Circle, north of Canada's Quebec province, is Baffin Island, 180,000 square miles of frozen wilderness and jagged coastline. Near the southeastern tip, barely visible on a map, is a bleak, rock-strewn island called Kodlunan, the island where white-skinned men lived. In 1861, an American explorer, Charles Francis Hall, was lured there by a rumor. Looking for traces of the Franklin expedition, which had perished there in 1847, he learnt little about it from the native people called Inuit. But they told him a strange tale of an English explorer. For 300 years, the story had been passed down orally from generation to generation. The Inuit never knew his name, but they remembered his peculiar passion for rocks. It was the golden age of exploration. In less than 100 years, half of the world had been discovered. By the middle of the 16th century, the pioneering voyages of Columbus were history. Now untold riches were flowing back to Spain on the trade winds, while Portugal was bound for Cathay and the fabled wealth of the Orient via the Cape of Good Hope. In England, the burgeoning new empires to the west were looked upon with envy. Merchants and traders, the backbone of the English economy, clamored for overseas markets and colonies. For them, the golden age of exploration had yet to begin. Shut out of the New World by the Spanish, they dreamed of a route to the Orient over the top of the Americas, a Northwest Passage. An experienced navigator and leader of men by his late 20s, the English sea captain Martin Frobisher was determined to find this Northwest Passage. In 1576, financed by a small group of London merchants and noblemen, he was able to put to sea in 2 tiny barks of some 20 tons each, the Michael and the Gabriel. Aboard was Lieutenant George Best, who would keep one of the few eyewitness accounts of the voyage. After 5 perilous weeks at sea, they entered a great body of water. To his right, Frobisher believed, was the continent of Asia. To his left was the mainland of America. Convinced that he had found the entrance to the Northwest Passage, he named it Frobisher Straits, then went ashore. The crew of the Gabriel would become the first Englishmen in history to encounter the Inuit. From a distance, Best would write, they looked like porpoises or some strange kind of fish, until they came closer and we discovered they were men in small boats made of leather. They exchanged coats of seal skins and bear skins and similar objects for bells, looking glasses, and other toys. After many courteous meeting, our men began to trust them.
When I read the document, I try to see in them what was the perception that the Inuit had of the English. And I always have that impression that the English at the time were kind of hardware for the Inuit. In other words, the Inuit look at them as a possibility of acquiring iron, something they did not have. So it had a lot of importance during the first voyage. So one day, contrary to Master Frobisher orders, 5 sailors went to land, probably for the hope of making a quick profit with the Inuit. So they went with the shore boat to land, and the Inuit captured those 5 people.
Without the shore boat, rescue was impossible. Frobisher's luck was running out. Before he left, according to custom, he took 2 tokens of possession. The captain, notwithstanding, desirous to bring some token from thence of being there, was greatly discontented that he had not before apprehended some of them. And therefore, to deceive the deceivers, he wrought a pretty policy. For knowing well how they greatly delighted in our toys, and especially in bells, he rang a pretty low bell, so that in the end one of them came near the ship's side to receive the bell, which, when he thought to take at the captain's hand, he was thereby taken himself. For the captain, being readily provided, let the bell fall and caught the man fast, and plucked him with main force, boat and all, into his bark out of the sea. The Inuit was exotic proof Frobisher had been to a new land. In England, no one had ever before seen or heard of such a strange infidel. But the other souvenir, a lump of black rock, would cause a sensation.
One story has it that a piece of this rock was put in the ship's furnace to see if it would burn. And at red heat, it didn't burn, but when they took it out, there were spots glowing or shining that looked very much like gold. And what had actually happened was that this rock, or a portion of it, had reacted with the oxygen of the air and produced a material of a different color. The rock otherwise would have been black. The whole thing would have been black, but on this black background were sparkles of so-called gold.
Back in London, expert opinion on the gold-bearing property of the rock was confused, perhaps deliberately so. At any rate, a rumor swept the city of the presence of gold in the territory visited by Frobisher. Then, as now, the hope of striking it rich proved irresistible, and the rush to be in on the deal even swept along Queen Elizabeth I, who loaned Frobisher a ship from the Royal Navy and invested £1,000 of her own money in the venture. In 1577, with the search for the Northwest Passage taking second place in the mind of its promoters, the Cathay Company was set up. Frobisher returned to the island where the rock had been found the year before. With him were 5 assayers.
At that time, metallurgy was rather well advanced. That they used fire assaying, and that fire assaying for gold and silver is much the same as the fire assaying today. So it had advanced to quite an advanced technical state back in even at 1550.
With 200 tons of rock, Frobisher returned to a warm welcome in England, where it was quickly decided to mount a third and even larger expedition. The last voyage of Martin Frobisher in 1578 was an expedition the like of which the eastern Arctic would not see again until the later years of the 20th century. This time, the search was simply for gold. To protect and develop the potential riches of Meta Incognita, as named by Her Majesty, 100 men, Marines and miners, would be left behind to found a settlement.
Well, Codlunarn is a very small island and barren and has a gravelly surface. It's not the kind of place where you would expect a group of Englishmen who sail across the ocean battling ice and storms and even unknown spirits, because they were very superstitious at that time as well. It's not the kind of place you'd expect people to want to live. It's not a cozy spot at all. It's very exposed. The only attraction is that it had these ore sources that Frobisher thought contained gold. And so the major activities on the island are those associated with a mining venture. There are two mines recognizable on the island now. One in the center, a big deep trough about maybe 50 meters long by 4 meters deep, where they extracted a lot of this ore. And a second one that cuts down through the edge of the island. There are three other major features on the island that are actually structures that were built by the Englishmen. One was a blacksmith shop, which contains a lot of fire brick, charcoal, coal, the remains of ironworking, a very interesting feature.
Another feature the English had built was the assay office. And why we maintain it's an assay office, we find in it fragments of crucibles and cupels. Crucibles and cupels were used by the assayers in order to test the minerals to see if they were containing any precious metals.
The final structure is the Frobisher House, so-called, which is was a stone foundation house built on the top of the island. It is the first stone structure built by Europeans in the New World, and it was about 4 or 5 feet high of stone, and then they built walls of wood and probably had a tile roof on it.
So the third summer, they built their base camp on this small island, which the Inuit called Codlunarn Island. And the plan of founding of a colony was abandoned because the two of the ships that were bringing prefabricated houses on that voyage, they were caught in the ice and they sank, so they never left the people.
The Inuit have a story they tell, which is a very strong tradition here in the Frobisher Bay area, that when Frobisher completed his voyages, he sailed away with this large group of ships, but somehow left behind a group of Englishmen who had to survive over the winter by building a house on Codlunarn and then in the spring building a boat out of the caches and supplies that Frobisher had left behind on Codlunarn Island.
By all English accounts, no one remained on the island after the final voyage. What could be the origin of this unusual legend?
This makes you wonder if these are the same Englishmen who were lost by Frobisher in 1576 when his group of 5 sailors and their boat was captured by the Inuit. Perhaps, in fact, this group did survive in the area and continued living somehow and came back just at the time of the Frobisher voyages were completed, discovered the remains, and tried to escape.
According to the Inuit, they sailed away but got trapped in the ice in Frobisher Bay and perished. 1,300 tons of ore were eventually mined on Codlunan Island. But before the expedition reached home, a rumor swept through London. The ore was worthless. It turned out to be a common mineral called hornblende.
The rock itself contained very little gold. And actually, so low, the scientific interest is that not so much that there is gold in it, but the scientific interest is because it contains so little gold.
What could have led Frobisher and his men to believe it was gold?
One possibility is that they were using additives to extract this gold and silver, and perhaps the additive was contaminated. Perhaps it was contaminated and they didn't know that it was contaminated. Or perhaps it was contaminated and they did know it was contaminated, and it was done purposely. The answer to these questions we'll just never know.
The Frobisher expedition found neither the Northwest Passage to Cathay nor the gold they so earnestly sought. But as artifacts increasingly suggest, could Frobisher's quest have been a gold mine for the Inuit?
It was, because I think for hundreds of years after he left Codlunan Island in 1578, people regularly went back to that and used it as a source of raw materials, the same as they go to a mountaintop for chert or to a good area for caribou. It was just another area with very good material in. Most of the Frobisher materials that turn up are pieces of tile, roofing tile, or else stove tile. They had glazed tiles for their stoves and their boats. And this is what shows up in Inuit sites close by Codlunan Island and as far away as 180 kilometers in towards the head of the bay. We found a large piece like this today, for example. Charles Francis Hall in the 1800s said that they often used pieces like this to polish brass ornaments. So they were getting brass later on and they used these as polishers. That's the most important artifact that we find from Frobisher. Today, Bill Fitzhugh found another first. This is two fragments of a very small container with some slag welded onto it. And this is probably a small crucible that the miners used to melt down the ore to extract the what they thought was gold.
The archaeological evidence slowly mounting up is shedding a new and fascinating light on the contact between two different cultures.
The impression that a lot of us have when we talk about contact situations is that the Inuit were just waiting in the wings, waiting to become integrated into European society, into the old world culture. But when we come across these very early sites, we see the opposite happening. That yes, there'll be European materials on the sites, but what is happening is that it's becoming integrated into the traditional way of life. So they may be using European materials, but not in the way the Europeans intended. So they'll cut up pieces of metal and make them for their end blades rather than use stone. They use these pieces of pottery to rub other artifacts as whetstones, and they're using them in a traditional way rather than in the way the Europeans intended.
A gold mine for the Inuit. The site of Frobisher's seemingly vain endeavor is far from having yielded up all its archaeological riches to modern scientists. But there is another respect in which this Elizabethan exploit was to have far-reaching consequences.
The Frobisher voyages produced a wealth of new information for a very young nation. Britain at that time was only joining the leaders of European nations in exploration, discovery, and business. Although the voyages were a disaster financially and in terms of the mining operations, they produced a tremendous amount of data for on Arctic exploration, on the regions of the world which the British knew nothing about, but would become a major, their major stronghold in the New World, north of the Spanish holdings to the south. In addition, it produced a whole group of experienced and trained navigators who were capable of traveling in the northern seas, who went on to make major discoveries and even worldwide explorations. It advanced the technology of marine construction, of boat building, of the production of materials needed for navigation, for setting big ventures, and eventually for establishing major colonies in the New World.
The sequel was not long in coming. In 1584, barely 6 years after Martin Frobisher's last voyage to the eastern Arctic, the ships of Sir Walter Raleigh returned from the New World with exciting news that spawned a new round of joint stock companies. This time, their sights were set on the eastern seaboard of America, on a stretch of land which was named in honor of the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. This time, they would not fail, and Virginia would become the nucleus of a flourishing settlement in the New World. George Best had prophetically closed his journal of the 3 voyages of Martin Frobisher with this entry: "There is no doubt that when the land is examined more closely, it will make our country both rich and exalted." Like so many others, Frobisher came to the New World in search of riches and fame. He dug only fool's gold, and his name has faded from the rolls of the great explorers. But his skills as navigator, geographer, and savvy financier pointed the way for those who came after, and helped make possible 300 years of British dominion over the colonial world.